Professor Mandla Makhanya, a Pan-Africanist, and it was fitting for the speakers to focus on the rise of Africa. His successor looked at the road they have traveled together at the institution and the fight for transformation.
At the time when the president of Haiti had come to South Africa, President Mbeki, that difficult time when President Aristide had to join the university, you had come with Professor Pichana, Professor Maluleke, where you were negotiating that President Aristide should have a place within the academy. At that point, there was a lot of resistance, including those academics who had been here at Unisa for a long time, sometimes walking around with guns, who then said, why did you and Mbeki, as they said it, bring a terrorist into Unisa? I was one of the lecturers at that time, the only black woman after Professor Madipwane Masenya. And at the time, lecturers did not have a voice. We were too junior to speak. But in a shaking voice, I raised my hand and I retorted to a professor who had defined President Aristide as a terrorist. I said, perhaps the terrorists are those who are walking on the hallways with guns, silencing everybody who has a voice and not allowing them to publish. And perhaps the terrorists are those who silence the quest for freedom and the marking of the democratic dispensation. And you and Professor Pichana then asked, who is this one who is speaking with a shaking voice, but yet courageous?
An update from the Chancellor of Unisa, who was the President of the Republic of South Africa at that time.
In the end, he graduated here as a doctor of philosophy, and wrote an extraordinary dissertation, a thesis. The title of that thesis is Umoya Omagama, the spirit of the words. It's an extraordinary discussion about the relationship in terms of languages of Creole in Haiti, Zulu, and Kiswahili. Thank you very much indeed for allowing that terrorist president to become an alumnus of Unisa. He is doing very well. President Aristide is actually running a university in Haiti. When he went back home, he opened a university inspired by this one, and is graduating students there.
He also touched on the current challenges the institutions of higher learning are facing.
When Zeleza said, I dream of truly decolonized, democratized, and decentralized African universities that are autonomous yet accountable, committed to the pursuit of intellectual excellence, yet rooted in their communities, effectively managed internally, yet working closely with other stakeholders. Universities that are Africanized in their staffing, in their values, in their pedagogy, in their epistemologies and instructional languages, and yet are capable of competing globally, contributing to the global pool of knowledge, and responding quickly and effectively to global changes and emerging local needs. Universities that attract students and faculty from across the continent and the diasporas. I think that's an important definition of what UNISA is and what UNISA ought to be.
On leadership in South Africa and the continent, Mbeki was frank.
As I think I'm sure all of us can see now very clearly, particularly in the context of the proceedings of the Zondo Commission or the Commission on State Capture, this particular challenge about leadership. And he said this when he was talking about at a certification ceremony for students at our African Leadership Institute. And said much of the inability of the continent to maximize its huge potential can be ascribed to a dearth in the right caliber of leadership on our continent. Honorable men and women of vision and integrity, who is committed to their people and their countries, outweighs any and all other considerations. And said it is a strong ethical leadership and unshakable self-belief, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, that will drive us forward and upward and will see this continent's potential blossom. And indeed regretted that in this regard we do not have a proud track record, and that it should be a matter of concern to all of us that as a people who claim to be shaped and formed by Ubuntu, there seems to be scant evidence of it, in fact, to many places and cases in Africa. And if Africa is rising, it is to succeed. If it is to succeed, it will need the right caliber of leaders at the helm.
As Professor Makhanya hands over the baton, he has no regrets.
So after 33 years at this place, which I call my other home, and having moved through the ranks, as we've all heard, from being a lecturer to that of its most senior position, that is Principal and Vice Chancellor, it is time to bid all of you a goodbye. As I pondered about these years, it dawned on me that when I started to work for the university, I told myself that's something that would stun you. I had indicated that I shall serve for 5 years and return to industry, Chancellor, Chair of Council, and Principal and Vice Chancellor. I was saying this primarily because that is where I worked when I concluded my studies at the university. Now, I cannot tell you, how do you compare 5 years with 33 years?
For the students, the struggle to fight for Africa's rightful place continue.
Servant leadership is a substantive element of Ubuntu. I am making this point in reference to the myriad problems afflicting this continent, owing to the crisis of leadership, neo-colonial leadership, neoliberal leadership, and indeed anti-black leadership. As Black Forum, we cherish your exemplary leadership. Unfortunately, this leadership has to retire now. Prof Makhanya, it is important to know that you have passed on the baton and not your shoes at a very historical and epochal point in the long life of this university. You have passed this baton to a black woman who, in her own right, has splendidly obliterated the shameful record or template of a university that had never had a female vice-chancellor in its 148 years of existence. Unisa Black Forum does not take for granted the tough and treacherous pathway and challenges that it endured when it confronted anti-black structural and systemic thorns that inflicted pain and suffering on black staff and students.
Sophie Mukwena, SABC News, Johannesburg.